Hey everybody, welcome to Algo Expert. In this video, we're going to answer the following behavioral interview question. Imagine you and your team are in the middle of a major project at work with many moving parts, complicated context, a lot of work, etc. A new software engineer joins your team and you're tasked with onboarding them. What do? So first of all, I really want to emphasize how important I think properly onboarding a new engineer is, because if you improperly onboard a new engineer, not only are you going to give them a very bad first impression of your team and of your company, which in turn will give them a bad first experience and just make them unhappy, which isn't good, but also you will be causing a lot of other negative effects to trickle down later on them as a person, because they won't be set up to perform properly and they might just perform poorly. They might have a bad career trajectory because of your improper onboarding experience that you gave them. But you'll also be having negative impact on your team, because suddenly you'll have to take more work. You'll have to do more work. You'll have to do the work that they were supposed to do. You'll have to handhold them more, and it'll just be bad for your team. And of course, in turn, this will negatively affect your company, because if your team isn't performing well, or if your team is too stressed, then your company is going to be affected. So all that to say that onboarding a new engineer is very important, should be taken very seriously, even if you're in the middle of a very large project with a lot of work. You have to prioritize onboarding the new engineer. Now, hopefully, you've done some pre-planning. Hopefully, you've been preparing for this new engineer. You knew ahead of time that they were going to be coming. But either way, 3 things that you can do to give them a great onboarding experience. I think these are probably the 3 most important things. Number 1 is having proper documentation in place. And I suppose this one is one that takes pre-planning. You have to have done that beforehand, but having proper documentation in place for the onboarding aspects of their job, like getting their new dev environment set up, the dev environment that you're working on as part of your team, knowing where they need to go to access important information or to do certain things. All of this stuff can be very easily captured in documentation. It can save you a ton of time, and it's just very important. There's nothing more frustrating than being a new engineer, trying to get your dev environment set up and just getting a bunch of errors that nobody knows about, that nobody's documented anywhere. It just is a really bad experience. So that's number 1, documentation. Number 2 is it's very important for you, or for me in this case, if I'm the one onboarding this new engineer, to make myself available for any questions that they might have and anything that they might need to unblock them. Especially when they are joining a team, like during the first few days, first couple of weeks, they're naturally going to have a lot of questions. They're naturally going to have a lot of things that they're blocked on. And you will be able to solve that. You will be able to help them there. And you don't want them wasting half a day or even a full day doing something or trying to figure out something that you could have basically unblocked them on in 10 seconds. So very important, make yourself available or make myself available for any questions that they have. And I think here, being overly available is much better than being underwhelmingly available, if that makes sense. Finally, the third thing I think that you have to do to give them a great onboarding experience is you have to very carefully pick the projects or the bug that they'll work on. And so the strategy that I've found historically has worked best for me for interns that I've managed, multiple interns, and for full-time employees just as well of any level, is to first, once they've set up everything, to start them out with 1 or 2 very, very simple bugs. Here we're talking like if we're working on the front end, just a text change or a button color change. Something to just get them acclimated to the code base, get them used to pushing up code, getting code reviews, all of that. That's just a very nice way to get their fingers wet without, overwhelming them. And that should take, a day, 2 days at most. Then Give them what I like to call a starter project. This is a project that's going to take maybe a week, at most 2 weeks. It should be very small and self-contained, not affecting or not depending on anybody else. But it should ideally, and again, this is where pre-planning comes into play, ideally it's something that will have a decent amount of impact. And for instance, again, coming from a front-end engineering background, something that will be visible, that you'll be able to launch, that maybe a customer had requested, but that wasn't super important. That way it'll also give them a nice, quick win. They'll have a quick win, they'll launch something, they'll feel proud, and ideally they'll have touched a few parts of the code base and just feel even more prepared to actually do, complex software engineering work on your team. And then finally, the third step of this process is to give them their first, big project. And this should be something that, again, ideally is self-contained. You don't want this to be on the critical path of your big project, especially if you're working on a huge project, super stressful. You don't want them to be blocking everybody else, right? That's going to be terrible for your team because you're going to be dependent on someone who's completely new. That's going to be a lot of stress for them. They're not going to like that, and you just don't want that. So something that's out of the critical path, that is, something that they can handle alone, that is appropriate for their level. You have to think, are they, a new grad, or are they a staff software engineer with tons of experience, and kind of, measure the project appropriately for that. And that's it. And of course, apart from that, just, being there, being a good teammate, being, going to lunch with them, and all sorts of social things that you would expect from a team. That's how I would handle onboarding a new engineer suddenly.